Picture this. You're scrolling through Zillow at midnight, and you see it. The perfect house. Modern kitchen with marble countertops, backyard that looks like a resort, maybe even a home theater in the basement. Price tag? $1 million. And for just a split second, you think, could I actually afford this? Here's the thing though. Most people asking that question are asking the wrong question entirely. Because affording $1 million house has almost nothing to do with the sticker price and everything to do with a number that most people completely ignore until it's way too late. So let's talk about who can actually afford $1 million house. And I'm not talking about celebrities or tech CEOs. I'm talking about regular people with regular jobs who might actually be closer to this than they think, or way further than they'd ever imagine. By the end of this, you're going to know exactly where you stand, and more importantly, whether dropping $1 million on a house is actually the smart move, even if you can afford it. The math everyone gets wrong. So here's where most people mess up. They see $1 million and they think, okay, I need to make $1 million to buy this house. Wrong, dead wrong. But also, the opposite is true too. Just because you make $300,000 a year doesn't mean you can actually afford this house either. The real number you need to focus on? Your monthly payment. Because that's what's coming out of your account every single month for the next 30 years. That's the number that determines whether you're living comfortably or lying awake at 3 a.m. wondering how you're going to make it work. Let's break this down with actual numbers. You're buying $1 million house. You put down 20%, which is $200,000. Already, we're talking about a number that most people don't just have sitting in their checking account. But let's say you do. You've saved it, you've invested well, you sold a previous property, whatever. You've got your $200,000 down payment ready to go. Now you're financing $800,000. At today's interest rates, which let's say are around 7%, your monthly payment just for principal and interest is going to be around $5,300. But we're not done. Not even close. In fact, we're barely getting started. Property taxes on a $1 million home? Depending on where you live, you're looking at anywhere from $800 to $2,500 a month. In Texas, you're paying closer to that higher number. In Florida, somewhere in the middle. Let's split the difference and say $1,500 a month in property taxes. Home insurance? On a property that expensive, especially in certain markets, you're probably paying $300 to $500 a month. And if you're in a flood zone or earthquake area, add another couple hundred on top of that. HOA fees, if you're in certain neighborhoods, could be another $200 to $800 a month depending on what amenities your community offers. Add it all up, and you're looking at a monthly payment somewhere between $7,500 and $9,000 every single month for 30 years. That's $90,000 to $108,000 a year just in housing costs. The income you actually need. Now here's where it gets interesting. There's this rule in real estate, and it's not just some random guideline that some financial guru made up. Banks actually use this when they're determining whether to give you a loan. It's called the 2836 rule, and if you've never heard of it, pay attention because this is crucial. The 28 part means your housing costs shouldn't exceed 28% of your gross monthly income, not your take-home pay, your gross income before taxes. The 36 part means your total debt, including your mortgage, car payments, student loans, credit cards, everything, shouldn't exceed 36% of your gross income. So if your monthly payment is $8,000, let's do some backwards math. Divide $8,000 by 0.28 and you get about $28,500. That's your gross monthly income that you need. Multiply that by 12 and you're looking at needing to make around $342,000 a year. $342,000 a year. Let that sink in for a second. But wait, remember that 36% rule? If you've got a car payment of $600 a month, student loans at $400, maybe some credit card debt at $200, suddenly you need to be making even more to stay within that threshold. You might need to be pushing $375,000 or $400,000 annually. This is why you'll see people making $250,000 a year getting denied for $1 million mortgage. The bank isn't being mean. The bank isn't trying to ruin your dreams. The math just doesn't work. And the bank knows that if they give you that loan, there's a higher chance you'll default, which is bad for everyone. The down payment problem. Let's talk about that $200,000 down payment for a second, because this is where a lot of people's dreams crash into reality. This is the filter that eliminates most people before they even get to the income requirement conversation. If you're making a decent salary, let's say $150,000 a year, and you're trying to be responsible and save 10% of your gross income, that's $15,000 a year going into savings. Sounds good, right? You're being responsible, you're building wealth. It would take you over 13 years to save up that down payment. 13 years. And that's assuming you're not touching that money for emergencies, vacations, a new car, helping family, medical bills, nothing. Just pure, uninterrupted saving for over a decade. But here's what actually happens for most people who buy million-dollar homes. They're not saving up $200,000 from scratch. That's extremely rare. They're either moving up from another property they own and using equity from a previous home, or they're getting help from family, or they got a massive windfall from stock options or a business exit. That house you bought for $400,000 5 years ago in a hot market, if it's now worth $600,000 and you owe $250,000 on it, you've got $350,000 in equity right there. Sell that house, take your equity, pay off your loan, and boom, you've got way more than enough for your down payment on the million-dollar place. This is why you'll see young couples in their 30s buying million-dollar homes in expensive cities like San Francisco or Seattle. They're not making $500,000 a year, but they bought their first place for $300,000 8 years ago, rode the market up, sold it for $550,000, used that equity to buy a $700,000 house, rode that up to $900,000, and now they're making their move to the million-dollar property. It's a ladder. Location changes everything. Here's something wild that people don't really grasp until they start looking. A million-dollar house in San Francisco is basically a teardown. I'm not exaggerating. You could be buying a house that hasn't been updated since 1960, needs a new roof, has ancient plumbing, is 1,200 square feet, and you're still paying $1 million because it's in the right zip code. Meanwhile, $1 million in Nashville or Austin, you're getting a brand new build, 4 bedrooms, 3.5 bathrooms, chef's kitchen with top-of-the-line appliances, hardwood floors throughout, the works. In parts of the Midwest or South, $1 million gets you an actual mansion with 5,000 square feet, an in-ground pool, a 3-car garage, and probably a couple acres of land. In Miami, you might get a nice condo with an ocean view. In Manhattan, you're getting a 2-bedroom apartment. In Denver, you're getting a solid single-family home in a good neighborhood. In Detroit, you're getting a literal palace. So the income you need also depends entirely on where you're buying. Someone making $200,000 in Des Moines has way more purchasing power than someone making $300,000 in Los Angeles. The lifestyle you can afford varies dramatically based on geography. This is why you can't just look at the price tag in isolation. You have to look at what that money gets you in your specific market and what kind of lifestyle that translates to. The hidden costs no one talks about. Okay, so you've got the income, you've got the down payment, you can afford the monthly payment according to the bank's calculations. You're good, right? You can buy this house and live happily ever after? Not quite. Because there's a whole category of costs that people forget about until they're already in the house and reality hits them in the face. Maintenance on a $1 million home is not the same as maintenance on a $300,000 home. That fancy HVAC system that heats and cools 3,500 square feet of space, when it breaks, and it will break, you're not paying $3,000 to fix it. You're paying $10,000 to $15,000 to replace it with a system that's powerful enough to handle that square footage. The roof on a larger home, $20,000 to $40,000 when it needs replacing every 15 to 20 years. Landscaping for that beautiful yard you fell in love with could easily be $500 to $1,000 a month if you're hiring professionals to keep it looking the way it did in the listing photos. Then there's appliances. When your $4,000 refrigerator dies, you're not running to Home Depot to grab an $800 replacement. You're getting another $4,000 refrigerator because that's what fits in the custom cabinetry. The general rule that financial advisors use is you should budget 1 to 2% of your home's value annually for maintenance and repairs. On a $1 million home, that's $10,000 to $20,000 a year. That's another $800 to $1,600 a month you need to be setting aside. Most people don't do this. They figure they'll deal with it when something breaks. And then the water heater goes out, the AC dies in the middle of summer, and they need to re-roof all in the same year. And suddenly they're looking at a $35,000 hit they weren't prepared for. What about dual incomes? Here's where things get more realistic for a lot of people. And this is actually the most common path to $1 million home ownership. If you're a couple where both people are working professional jobs, suddenly that $342,000 a year doesn't seem as impossible. Two people each making $170,000? That's very doable in certain industries. Software engineers at big tech companies, doctors who've been practicing for 5 to 10 years, lawyers at decent firms, consultants, senior managers at Fortune 500 companies, people in finance. These aren't unicorn salaries. They're good salaries for sure, but they're not CEO money. They're the upper middle class in expensive markets. This is actually the most common profile for $1 million home buyers in expensive markets. It's not single people making $500,000. It's couples who are both high earners combining their incomes and using their combined financial power to buy the house. But here's the risk nobody wants to talk about, and this is really important. What happens if one person loses their job? What if you have a kid and one person decides to stay home or cut back to part-time? What if someone gets sick and can't work for 6 months? Suddenly, you've lost half your income, but your mortgage payment stays exactly the same. This is why even dual-income households need to have a serious conversation before buying at the top of their budget. Can you afford this house on one income if something happens? Because life happens. Jobs get lost, health issues arise, priorities change when kids enter the picture. The investment piece. Now let's flip the script for a second and think about this from a pure wealth building perspective. Should you buy $1 million house even if you can technically afford it? Because this is where the conversation gets really interesting. Here's what nobody tells you when you're house shopping and you're emotionally attached to that kitchen island and those vaulted ceilings. That $200,000 down payment, if you invested it in the S&P 500 instead and it grew at an average of 10% a year, which is roughly the historical average, in 30 years, that's about $3.5 million. Your monthly payment of $8,000? If you bought a $500,000 house instead and invested the $3,000 difference every month in 30 years at that same 10% return, you'd have an additional $6.7 million. Now, I know what you're thinking. But Max, the $1 million house will also appreciate. And you're right, it will. But even if it doubles in value over 30 years, you've got a $2 million house. Meanwhile, the person who bought the cheaper house and invested the difference has that house, which also appreciated, plus nearly $7 million in investment accounts. I'm not saying don't buy the house, I'm saying you need to think about opportunity cost. What else could you do with that money? What are you giving up to live in this particular house? For some people, the $1 million house is the dream, and the lifestyle it provides is worth more than the extra wealth they could build elsewhere. And that's fine. That's a legitimate choice. But make sure it's an intentional choice, not just because you think it's what you're supposed to do when you start making good money. The lifestyle trade-off. Let's get real about lifestyle for a minute, because this is where the rubber meets the road. Say you make $350,000 a year as a household. That sounds like a lot of money, and it is. But let's walk through what that actually looks like when you buy the $1 million house. After taxes, depending on your state, you're probably taking home around $230,000 to $250,000. In a high-tax state like California or New York, maybe you're taking home $210,000. If your housing costs are $8,000 a month, that's $96,000 a year going to your house. You've got $114,000 to $154,000 left for everything else. Retirement savings, which you should be putting at least $40,000 to $50,000 away annually if you're making that much. Kids' college funds, car payments, insurance, food, utilities, cell phones, internet, gas, vacations, eating out, entertainment, hobbies, clothing, gifts, all of it. It's still a great income. You're not struggling, but you're not living like someone who makes $350,000. You're living more like someone who makes $250,000 or less because so much is going to the house. Some people are totally fine with that. The house is the priority. They want the nice neighborhood for the schools. They want the space for their family. They want to host gatherings. They want the prestige. They'll cut back on vacations, drive their cars longer, cook at home more, whatever it takes. Other people would rather have a $600,000 or $700,000 house and use that extra $2,000 to $3,000 a month to travel internationally twice a year, max out all their retirement accounts, invest in a side business, or just have more financial breathing room and less stress. Neither choice is wrong, but you have to know which type of person you are before you buy, and you have to be honest with yourself and your partner about it. The two types of million-dollar buyers. In my experience watching people buy expensive real estate, people who buy million-dollar homes fall into two pretty distinct categories. First, you've got the wealth builders. These are people who see the house as part of a larger financial strategy. They bought in an appreciating market, they've run the numbers 6 different ways, they've got the income to comfortably afford it without being stretched, and they plan to use the equity later to fund other investments or downsize in retirement and use the proceeds to fund their lifestyle. For them, it's a calculated move on a spreadsheet. Then you've got the lifestyle buyers. These are people who are maxing out what they can afford, or maybe even slightly beyond what they should afford, because they want a certain quality of life right now. They're not necessarily thinking about what this means for their net worth in 20 years or whether this is the optimal financial decision. They want the nice house in the nice neighborhood with the nice schools, and they're willing to be house poor to get it. Again, neither is wrong. But the wealth builders sleep better at night because they've got more cushion. They're not worried about a job loss or a market downturn. The lifestyle buyers might have more anxiety about job security, unexpected expenses, or market fluctuations. They're more vulnerable. The reality for most people. So who can actually afford $1 million house? Here's the honest answer that might disappoint some people. You probably need to be making at least $300,000 to $350,000 a year as a household to comfortably afford it. You need at least $200,000 saved up for a down payment and closing costs. You need minimal other debt, ideally no car payments or student loans eating into that 36% debt-to-income ratio. And you need to be okay with a large chunk of your monthly income and your overall net worth being tied up in housing. For most Americans, that's just not realistic. The median household income in the United States is under $80,000. Even in expensive cities, it's rare to see median household incomes above $150,000 to $180,000. This means million-dollar homes are primarily accessible to the top 10 to 15% of earners, people who've built up significant equity from previous homes and are trading up, or people getting substantial financial help from family, which happens more than people want to admit. According to recent data, about 8% of homes sold in the U.S. are priced at $1 million or more. That's not a huge percentage, it's a slice of the market that caters to a slice of the population. The goal isn't to buy the most expensive house you can afford. The goal is to build wealth and live a life you actually enjoy. Sometimes those two things align in $1 million house, sometimes they don't.